Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Well, welcome to our noon book review. Today we're going to hear from attorney Paul Rapp. He specializes in internet law, entertainment law, copyright and trademark law, and intellectual property law. He's also on WAMC. He writes for Metroland, and he's also the drummer for Blotto. And he's going to talk about a book today called The Cult of the Amateur: How Today's Internet is Killing Our Culture by Andrew Keen. So here's Paul.
Good afternoon, fans of the internet. My name's Paul Rapp. I have done all the things that he said, and I was thrilled to get a call to do a book review, because I don't think I've done a book review since I was in ninth grade, and and did like The Old Man and the Sea or something like that. So I thought this would be a fun thing to do. I was happy to do it. I'd heard of this book when it came out, I guess late last year. I remember in passing seeing it, probably mentioned on the internet somewhere, that this book was out with this guy attacking the internet. And yeah, I probably wouldn't have read it otherwise. I remember seeing there was a review in the New York Times that I didn't read either. I spent all my days reading and writing about this stuff anyways, and when I have free time, I didn't think, just from the premise of the book, that this would be anything that would be particularly enriching to me, so I decided not to go read it. When I have free time, I'll read something totally unrelated to the stuff that I do all day. So I just jumped in and I started reading the book. I hadn't done any research prior about Andrew Keen or anything like that, and I had a problem reading the book. I couldn't read it for more than 10 pages at a time, because I would get so irate at what this guy was saying. It was like a cartoon. My face was like turning red, whoop, like this. I was reading it on an airplane with my family, and my wife kept nudging me, telling me to shut up, because I was like apparently yelling out swear words, without knowing it while I was reading this. About 30 pages into the book, I decided this is just an elaborate joke, that someone who actually loves the internet, someone who's, it just wrote this just to see what kind of reaction he would get, that Andrew Keen couldn't be a real person. And then I looked at the picture in the back, and it confirmed my fears, because I don't know if you've read the book or seen his picture in the back, but he's got this expression on his face. I mean, it's a face only a mother can love. And I've seen, he doesn't actually, he's not a bad-looking guy, but this expression that he used, that he chose for his book, the book is full of some absurd logic, some crazy assumptions, and some things that just are not true, that he uses to build his case here, that the internet, which is easily the most important advance in communication since the invention of the printing press, is somehow ruining our culture and is somehow going to hasten the end of the world as we know it. After I finally finished the book, after about 20 or 30 reading sessions, I did research Mr. Keen. He is a real person. He's got some promotional material that I've seen on the web, that he is some kind of pioneer on the internet and helped develop this sort of mode of commerce that we see on the internet right now. And I've seen some detractors say that that's really not so. He came up with a site called Audio Cafe in the late 90s, where music and interviews were going to be transmitted over the internet, and got a bunch of investment money. But like almost everything else that was put up on the internet back in the late 90s, it went bust, because most of us at home had, most people weren't acclimated to the internet yet as they are now. Most people, I think most critically, still had just dial-up, very slow internet connections, so getting music or getting anything delivered to you over the internet was a chore and a headache. So his his business went bust, I think, even before the whole internet went bust in around 2000. And since then, he's been trying different things and doing some writing and whatnot. Now, if you've read his book and you hear about how critical he is about bloggers and made-for-internet TV and YouTube and stuff like that, you'll be interested to know that he has a very elaborate blog in which he puts up his writings about his opinions of all kinds of stuff. And his blog has links to all of the places where he's debated people since his book has come out. His publicist has been working overtime. When his book came out, there was a firestorm of criticism where people were bloggers, internet theorists and whatnot were talking about a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here. And his publicist would regularly call them up and ask if they could debate. And so then there would be a debate, and everybody gets on TV, and all that helps to sell more books. But on his blog on the internet are all these links to all of the debates that he's had, including ones that are on YouTube, for which nobody's getting paid. He also has a regular podcast in which he interviews people and stuff. And I found out all this stuff about Andrew Keen, about going to that awful site that he seems to hate so much, Google, which gave me all the information about Andrew Keen I could ever want. He fashions himself as a contrarian. I've seen this in his self-descriptions. He's a contrarian, which means, I guess, one who takes an opposing view. Not one who necessarily believes the opposing view, but one who just takes it maybe for sport. In the best light, maybe Keen is somebody who really loves the internet and is trying to engender some kind of discussion, taking on some of the most radical views of the internet, or at least concocting what he believes to be radical views of the internet and the defeat of authorship and the destruction of our entertainment industry, etc. And is just trying to engender discussion. I cannot believe that he believes half of the things that he actually says in his book. Oh, he was also on the Stephen Colbert Show, which is the fake news interview show that runs on Comedy Central. Stephen Colbert pretends to be a Bill O'Reilly, extreme right-wing interviewer, and just asks ludicrous questions and makes ludicrous points. And I watched the episode. I linked from Keen's blog to Comedy Central blog and watched the Stephen Colbert interview. And it wasn't clear to me that Keen knew that he was on a comedy show. Colbert's asking him the absurd questions that he tends to ask, and Keen was answering him straightforward, actually, with some amount of anger and belligerence, with the same sort of attitude that he shows in this book. But I guess that's good, even bad, as P.T. Barnum said, any publicity is good publicity as long as they spell your name right. And he's been getting plenty of this, including an almost fawning interview in the New York Times that I read a couple of times, and I just failed to understand what was going through the reviewer's head or why. The book, I suppose, is provocative in some sense of the word. But let's get into the book. In Keen's world, the internet, is a place where anybody can say anything they want, which is true, and that everybody is yelling, and that everybody's voice is equal, and that we, the listener, the user, are totally powerless and incapable, not just powerless, but I think incapable of separating the wheat from the chaff. And so it's sort of like, you turn on the internet and just everybody's yelling at once, and everybody's voice is equal. And how do you tell who's telling the truth, what the truth is? This cacophony of amateurs, and Keen keeps referring to people that post things on the internet as amateurs. He refers to them as monkeys. He very much dehumanizes people who contribute stuff to the internet. In his view, all of this egalitarian contribution of information, of opinion, of movies, of music, is going to simply drive the entertainment industry, the mainstream media, and professional experts, professional disciplines of all kinds, he seems to say, completely out of business. And it'll just leave us all just sort of fat, dumb, and happy, staring at our computer screen, watching dogs on skateboards and Mentos Diet Coke geysers. I mean, those are two of the most popular videos on YouTube. There's a dog on a skateboard who's going back and forth across the parking lot. It's been seen probably 5 million times. And then someone decided if you put a Mentos mint in a bottle of Diet Coke, it sets off a geyser that goes up 30 feet. And there's hundreds of those on YouTube. The fact of the matter is that, putting your video of a Mentos geyser on YouTube does not displace anybody else's place on YouTube. And the only way they're going to find your Mentos geyser is if they do a search for Mentos geysers and then, filter through the 500 other Mentos geysers movies there are. Our culture, I don't think, is going away. Keene just strikes me as the worst sort of elitist who believes that there's this class of people, this race of people who are smarter than we are and who can tell us what it is that we should listen to and what it is that we should believe, that there's a race of people out there who somehow define the truth and dictate it to us. And he clearly believes quite strongly that he's a member of that superior class. There is no such class, and if there was, I don't think he'd be a member of it. He's also a staunch supporter of what's been called imperial copyright, where we are all just passive consumers of our culture, that someone else creates it and it gets delivered to us, and we pick and choose from these preordained choices of what it is we want to watch, what it is we want to listen to. But there's a narrow set of choices. That's the way the entertainment industry has been built up, and that's the way our culture has been since there has been mass media for the last 100 years. It's not intractable, and it's not the worst thing in the world if that gets watered down or filtered or diluted by, for lack of a better term, the common people. Keene doesn't trust us to weigh in with our own skills. He doesn't trust us to weigh in with our own opinions or our own voices. And he doesn't trust us to be able to make a determination of who's telling the truth or when somebody's doing a parody. He keeps going on and on about spoof advertisements. Here's a direct quote from him. Our trust in traditional advertising is being further compromised by spoof advertisements proliferating on the internet. Do you have trust in traditional advertising? I mean, it just, challenge. I mean, he's got just statements like this over and over again. Our trust in traditional advertising. Okay. I believe the internet's just a reflection of the world as it is, with all of its warts and its weirdness and its deviousness, and as well as all of its beauty and positiveness. It also now, along with a number of other factors, is allowing everybody a shot at being a creator, and importantly, to distribute their creations to everybody else. Any of us now, I bought a new computer last week. It came with a full recording studio in it. I'm like, God, if I was 15, this would be the greatest thing ever. But I'm not. I'm showing my 13-year-old. She's like, in her room, like composing music, which is pretty darn good. If I had the time, I'd be doing it too. Once she gets her music composed, she can post it on the internet. She can put it on her MySpace page or wherever. Some people can start to listen to it. It can start to whiz around. And it has happened that people making music under those circumstances have made very, very good music that's just as good as what's coming out of LA or New York or London or Tokyo, and have gotten famous and rich through their creations. And it's something, the barrier to entry to the music business, to the movie business, to the literature business is dropping very quickly to zero. When I was playing music back in the late 70s, we had to save our money to go to a recording studio that's only about a half mile from here. Took all of our gig money and put in our pocket money and spent a couple of weekends recording a couple of songs. And then we had to save money to press them onto vinyl discs. And then, what are we going to do? Then we sent them out through, some luck and the fact that we had one very, very good song. We started getting radio airplay all over the place. And then we found out we couldn't sell the records. We couldn't get them in stores because the channels of distribution were controlled by 5 or 6 basic companies who didn't want to sign us to a record contract. We were on our own record label. We had our own record company, which was located in my kitchen on Hudson Avenue in Albany. And I had piles of records. And I'm sending, records directly to record stores who said, okay, well, we'll take them. But we had no real distribution. And we were getting played all over the country on the radio. There was a complete dislocation between the popularity of our song and the willingness of these major record companies to sign us. If there had been internet at the time, all of the people who heard us on the radio, we'd go out and tour and we'd be playing in towns, sold out shows, and people would say, we can't find your record, it's not in the record stores. And we'd say, well, we're trying, but if there had been an internet at the time, all of these people would have had the ability to go buy our songs directly as soon as they heard it on the radio. As I once said, more or less in jest, if there had been an internet back in 1980 when I Want to Be a Lifeguard hit, I'd be dead now. As it was, we sold a modest number of records, but we never, made the break. We never got the level of riches that our fame would have dictated. The following year, our video for I Want to Be a Lifeguard, which was a student project from some kids at SUNY, was on MTV. The very first day MTV was on the air and stayed in heavy airplay on MTV for the following 2 years. So the people who hadn't heard us on the radio were now seeing us on TV, and we still couldn't sell records. The internet would have changed all that. I can't believe that this egalitarian access from creators who now the pool of creators is much larger because it's much easier to create, to people who want to consume creativity. I don't understand how that can be a bad thing. Keane keeps saying, and I've heard other people say this, there's too much music being made. There's just too much music. And I'm like scratching my head going, is this guy nuts? How can there be too much music? It used to be, before there was recorded music, before there was radio, which wasn't all that long ago, 100, 150 years ago, people entertained themselves by learning to play the piano. Or if they were too lazy, then they bought a player piano, which was, the stereo of the day in the late 1800s. And they entertained each other, and they wrote their own songs. Are we that much richer because this imperial copyright thing has developed? These record companies, these movie companies, these mass media companies. It's a cheap shot, and I've seen people criticizing Keane saying, this is a cheap shot, but you can answer his book. At least the part of it where he's talking about how horrible it would be if the record companies and the movie companies and the TV stations all just went away. You can answer that argument with 2 words: Britney and Paris. Britney Spears, by the way, I've been to a lot of conferences about all kinds of things, economic conferences, music business conferences, and Britney Spears comes up all the time in all of them as sort of an answer to, how bad things have gotten. She's like the one-stop answer for, academics, with rich British accents would just say, well, I have an answer for that, Britney Spears. And it doesn't matter what the question is half the time. A few of the specifics I want to get into that where Keane is disingenuous at best and just simply a liar. As I was reading the book, I had a highlighter until my arm got tired, but there's a lot of yellow in my book. He blames internet bloggers. A blog is someone who just writes something, and it's very easy to post it on the internet, and it stays there forever, and if you can search, if a word you use in there pops up, and when somebody searches it, they can find your blog and read it. Your blog, people have to go find your blog. You don't write a blog and it suddenly just sort of spits out on everybody's computer all over the world. Somebody has to go look for it. And there's thousands, hundreds, millions of bloggers. I read somewhere where 60,000 new blogs are started every day in this country. I have 2 of them, and some people read them. But I post stuff that I write on them, and for one reason, it's just a nice place to store everything where I've written. I know it'll be there. he blames bloggers for a $2.5 billion reduction in the value of Wendy's hamburgers chain from that cut off finger episode from 2 years ago. Some lady claimed she found a finger in her chili and tried to sue Wendy's. And, you know, he's blaming the bloggers for creating this hysteria that resulted in Wendy's stock dropping $2.5 billion or something like that. You know, it wasn't the bloggers, you know. A, it was the woman who lied, you know, and B, you know, it was the mainstream newspapers that carried this story every day for 2 weeks. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't the bloggers. The bloggers certainly talked about it and talked about, you know, the horrors of fast food and stuff, but it really was the mainstream press. I saw this on the evening news. I saw it referred to in the newspaper, even in the Berkshire Eagle, for 3 or 4 or 5 days. I mean, this story got beaten and beaten and beaten in. He's all upset that videos on YouTube, which is a place where anybody can post video content. YouTube is currently being sued. Well, YouTube was bought by Google for $5 billion, and they're now being sued by everybody because YouTube's position is we will post anything that is put on here. If somebody complains about it, we will take it down. If it's a copyright infringement, if it's somebody else's content, we will take it down upon a complaint. Keene's particular complaint here was that a lot of interest groups are posting videos on YouTube and not saying who they are. He mentioned a parody of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth that was put up, that it was apparently done by some right-wing group to make fun of Al Gore, and they didn't disclose it. So people are watching this parody of An Inconvenient Truth and not knowing where it came from. Major corporations trying to build their image will post sometimes amateur-looking videos on YouTube to try to bolster their corporate image without saying it's coming from the corporation. And he's blaming the internet for this. I mean, this is nothing new. Vance Packard wrote the book The Hidden Persuaders in 1957, talking about how devious advertisers and corporations can be in getting their message out. They're just, you know, using whatever they can to get their message out. And if they're being a little bit deceptive, you know, in terms of politics, I mean, you know, Nixon's famous dirty tricksters in 68 and 72, and he certainly wasn't the first one. I mean, it goes all the way back to George Washington, people, you know, pulling tricks, trying to pull the rug out from under their competitors. You know, it's not an internet phenomenon at all. The internet is really not that much different than the real world. It's just faster and it's easier and it's more accessible to everybody. You know, he really hates Wikipedia. He goes berserk on Wikipedia for about half of his book. Wikipedia is a volunteer-created encyclopedia online where volunteers submit information about all kinds of various topics, and you can go to Wikipedia and do a search on any topic you want, and out comes this volunteer, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have contributed to Wikipedia. He describes a couple horror stories of where there is misinformation or inaccurate information on Wikipedia, and he blames it on these hordes of loathsome amateurs, all us crazy people, running around posting whatever we want on the internet about whoever we want without any consequence. And then he compares it to Encyclopedia Britannica, which has now gone online with its own, they've put their entire encyclopedia online, and he talks about how every entry in Britannica has been thoroughly vetted by paid experts who are recognized, blah, 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 blah. Then he mentions there was a situation last year where a contributor to Wikipedia had posted his resume. It's usually done fairly anonymously if you want it to be anonymous. And some guy claimed that he had 3 or 4 advanced degrees from Harvard and Yale and whatnot. You know, and it turned out apparently he was a 17-year-old kid. And I think he just bolstered his resume, you know, in order to give his posting some more legitimacy. And this was, I remember, all over the news talking about how this showed that Wikipedia was a fraud and dangerous and whatnot because this guy had misrepresented, you know, his qualifications when he was putting in postings. The one thing I didn't see in any of the news was that any of his postings were in any way inaccurate, or that any of his postings were not the equivalent of what some expert would have put up. No one ever said, no one ever pointed out, because I'm sure they would have if his stuff had been inaccurate or dangerous or made up. But apparently he was, really quite a trooper and loading up Wikipedia with all kinds of interesting information and helpful information that he was finding wherever. I use Wikipedia all the time. It's the first place I go to. I would never in a million years cite it as a source, but it's the first place I go. And I've looked at the architecture of Wikipedia. I've been involved with clients who, wanted Wikipedia entries deleted, or, there was defamatory stuff and whatnot. And I've gone into sort of the democratic way that Wikipedia entries are built up, and I believe in them. I mean, I will take what I read on there often with a grain of salt. I would never go to Wikipedia for something that's currently in the news or has any taint of controversy, because people will go in there and put in their own point of view and delete everything they don't agree with. But for the vast body of knowledge out there, I will go to Wikipedia. There are always links on Wikipedia to the primary sources where you can go and verify what you've read. But it's controversial, or it's comprehensive, and it really has stuff about everything. I mean, my little band has a page on Wikipedia. I didn't put it up there. Nobody in the band put it up there. But it's pretty good. It's not very long, but it's up there and it's accurate. I've supplemented it a couple of times with some band members that weren't posted there. I made sure they were included. And then I noticed a couple of weeks ago that somebody had gone and inserted themselves as a member of the band. I'd never heard. Suddenly there's Juan Blotto playing guitar, there's parts of the 80s I don't remember, but I would have remembered Juan Blotto, and I just thought, this is great. If this guy likes the band enough that he wants to be a member of it on Wikipedia, God bless him. And I figure everybody who looks at the page who actually knows anything about the band is going to see that and get a laugh. Finally, I'm aware that in the past year there have been at least 2 studies, academic studies, about the accuracy of Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica or versus other places, and that it has, in fact, sort of in the cumulative, stood up as reasonably accurate, as competitively accurate as Encyclopedia Britannica. And in fact, there was one study where they polled experts, academics, and then they polled the public at large. And academics held Wikipedia in higher regard than the people at large. I think mainly because academics spend their time on the internet. They use Wikipedia like I do, realize what its worth is, and where the public at large, reads stuff like this, and maybe scared off of Wikipedia because they're afraid that it's it's this horrible thing that's going to ruin our culture. He complains that bloggers who talk about political things and current news may be ruining the mainstream media, may be ruining mainstream newspapers, may be ruining mainstream TV. My first inclination, at first, as far as TV news goes, is who cares? The networks and CNN have stopped, as far as I'm concerned, being really reliable news organizations a long time ago. And this has less to do with the internet than it has to do with corporate consolidation, where the big TV networks are not standalone corporations anymore. There is no integrity to the news division. The news division is just another commercial entity that has to report, profits and losses, so they can make a report to the shareholders every quarter. And if the news, which is an expensive thing to do and to do right, isn't paying the freight, and I'd submit that it probably can't pay the freight most of the time, to do accurate news gathering. News networks are going to be cut, and news divisions were being cut long before the budgets were being cut long before the internet came along. This is why there's more news that can be found, for example, on the Jon Stewart Show than there will be from Katie Couric or Brian Williams. And there have been studies that have shown that there was actually more information being transmitted in the fake news show by Jon Stewart than by the evening news. and don't even get me started on Fox News. I mean, bloggers are going to, hurt the journalistic integrity of Fox News. In terms of newspapers, newspapers are transitioning to the internet, and they're doing it quickly and they're doing it fairly effectively. And I think they're figuring out how to make money on it. I think advertisers are migrating as well. But if you go to the Times-Union site, you find the news, and then you find in-depth coverage that you're not going to find in the printed paper. The New York Times does the same thing. The idea that a horde of bloggers are somehow going to drive the real news gatherers out of business really insults all of us. Readers of real journalism will continue to follow real journalists. If I want to read Cy Hirsch, or if I want to read Carl Bernstein, or I want to read, Fred LeBrun, or I'll go find them and I'll read them. I'm not going to go and read Matt Drudge instead because he's easier to find. I'm going to, find the real. I'm going to find the real journalists. If I want to know what's really going on, I'll go to the New York Times, before I go to the Daily Cause. Or someplace like that. And I don't think I'm alone here. He complains a lot about inaccuracies online, and he uses as an example, and this astounded me, the coverage of Hurricane Katrina, and said all this information was coming out from bloggers about what was going on, at the dome, the networks. I remember when Katrina hit on a Monday evening, I'm looking for news. I'm watching TV, and where all the news, the night of Katrina, and Katrina, was seen 5 days out. Here comes the big one. It's coming to New Orleans. It's coming. It's definitely coming. We're not kidding. This time it's really coming. And on Monday night, after it hit, the news networks had their anchors various places. I think 2 of them were in Aruba, covering that disappearance 4 months before of the blonde woman from Alabama, the 18-year-old girl who had disappeared. And this was somehow kept, people disappear all the time, I'm sorry. Maybe not all of them are blonde and pretty and abducted by people of color, allegedly, which gives this, this story its pizzazz. But why was this still a story 4 months, after the fact? Why was this still a story, and why were all these news people still sitting at Aruba, when one of America's great cities had been totally laid to waste? I mean, the bloggers and the people with cell phones and the people that got the information out, that was the only information we were getting, for the first 18 to 24 hours after the hurricane hit. And if it was a little bit inaccurate, well, that's the price we have to pay for getting information. The news is what drove Keith Olbermann from being the anchor on MSNBC in 1998. He'd gone from sports to being their straight anchor man in 1998, and after 4 straight months of having a lead story about Monica Lewinsky, said, "This isn't what I'm here for. I'm a newsman. This is nonsense." And he quit, and he went off to do sports again, only to be brought back a few years later. And now he's become one of America's most prominent journalists by virtue of his special reports, which are highly opinionated, and he lets you know they're highly opinionated. Well, if you don't know, you'll know by his 3rd sentence or so. Highly critical of the current administration. And the reason, or one big reason, why he's become so popular is his special reports were captured and posted on YouTube. That's where I saw them for the first time. I'd see a couple of them on YouTube, and I started watching his regular show on MSNBC every night. He decries the end of the entertainment industry. He goes on and on about Tower Records, his favorite music store, where he used to go, and he talks about he'd dawdle there on rainy Sunday afternoons, and the helpful clerks would guide him as to what music he should be buying. And I'm thinking, I've spent a lot of time in record stores, and I had clerks who were friends who I'd hang out with, but, dawdling on a rainy Sunday afternoon and having them guide me towards what music I might like, it never really happened to me. I mean, he can use his anecdote, and I'll use mine. If I want to find out about music, I'll go to the internet and see what people have written about it. I am a member, I subscribe to eMusic, where if you find somebody you like, there'll be listener suggestions. If you like this, you'll also like, and there'll be 10 names over to the side. Some of them I've heard of, some I haven't, some I'm reminded of. Oh yeah, I should check that band out. People I haven't heard of, I can go, I can sample, I can listen, I can go to professional reviews, I can go to amateur reviews, I can also buy whatever I want in the comfort of my own house. And I buy a lot more music now than I did when I had to go to a record store and dawdle on a Sunday afternoon and talk to an unhelpful clerk, only to find that the music that I really wanted isn't in stock. I don't really understand, he keeps talking about when the music died, and he holds up as examples classical music, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and the Beatles' Apple Road. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon and Abbey Road, Abbey Road are both, 30 years old at this point. Classical music, the major record companies have done really next to nothing for classical music over the last couple of years. I talked to a executive from a classical music company, a record company, just last week, and asked him about how things were after Tower Records died, because Tower did have, it was one of the few record stores that had a deep classical library. And he said, oh, it's so much better now that Tower is gone. He said, why? He goes, because there are so many mom and pop stores opening up. He said, we don't have to deal with Tower's discounts. We're actually selling more records. They're getting distributed more widely. When Tower came to town, every mom and pop record store in town closed down, and there was only one place to go. Now the mom and pops are coming back because there are those people who still want their classical music and still want to go to a store to get it. And now there are places for them to go. After huffing and puffing for about 150 pages with all this nonsense, it sounded like he'd run out of things to say, because first he was talking about, killing our culture, and then the next thing you know, he's talking about the evils of internet gambling. Sort of the garden variety gambling is bad. I mean, gambling, addiction, I'll agree, is bad. I don't think you can blame the internet for it. It was there before the internet. It's there now. He talks about pornography and children's access to pornography. These arguments have been made by others and better for years. The solution of what you're going to do about it is unclear. Identity theft. He starts talking about identity theft. I'm like, what has this got to do with his central premise? He's sort of treading water. He probably wanted to make sure he got over 200 pages with fairly large type and double spaced. And then at the end, he goes, solutions. And I've been waiting for this. I'm thinking, well, A, it's not that bad, but even if it was that bad, what are you going to do about it? And so he's got his last 20 pages are solutions. He has no solutions. He doesn't have any. There's no payoff at the end. He talks about some developments that are happening anyway, certainly without him, in terms of news organizations resuscitating themselves. He actually blames the record companies for a lot of their own problems, which I thought was rather interesting and rather candid, although I don't know how you could blame anybody but the record industries for a lot of their problems. And then at the end, he kind of said, well, law enforcement should enforce the laws and parents should watch their children more carefully when they're online. Well, thank you, Mr. Keene. And then the book is over. Information and art really need not be dictated to us anymore by a privileged few. Everybody can create. It becomes the user's task to figure out what the user likes. There are those people, and maybe most of us, who enjoy having it delivered to us, no questions asked, and we take what's given to us. But if you have specialized likes and needs and interests, the internet, for the first time, makes it all available to all of you on your own terms. And as quickly and as slowly as you wanted. I don't think it's killing our culture at all. I think it's causing our culture to flower in ways that no one ever thought would be humanly possible before the internet. And just looking at a couple more inaccuracies here that he has. It's not worth talking about. You know, one thing, he may see this on Colonie public access TV, and his publicist may call me for a debate, but because that seems to be his MO in promoting his book. But I don't think I'll take the bait. I don't need the publicity that much. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Why do you think people like Mark McGuire are not going to do the entertainment in the country? And this is a national trend. He's went to a sports column. They're not going to cover television or radio anymore. Do you know anything about that?
No. What, Mark decided he was...
I don't know whether, I think it was his decision to go to sports, but that I talked to the boss at the Times Union, and they said this is the national trend. Newspapers are not covering radio or television.
Huh. Maybe because it's so decrepit, like sports is a paragon of goodness these days. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a business decision on the part of on the part of the newspapers, but maybe the newspapers think that the internet has because I mean the internet is a new thing, and it's going to cause things to shift, and maybe they think that it's just simply not worth it to have television or newspapers commenting on television. That's too bad, because I always liked what Mark wrote about TV. Yeah.
What a question. Well,
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.